We control what your kids listen to, what they dance to. We control what's in video games.
The cameras only ever show the stage lights, the crowds, the hits that climb charts and loop on playlists. But behind the lyrics and the fame, some careers were moving in a very different direction. A cold case in Harlem that sat unsolved for nearly 2 decades. A bank robbery in Philadelphia that left a police officer dead. A nightclub shooting in Louisiana. An upstairs neighbor stabbed on a Manhattan sidewalk. And others who are not convicted of murder, but now stand in courtrooms fighting for their freedom as prosecutors read out words like racketeering, trafficking, and double homicide. Tonight, we are going to walk through those stories, slowly, carefully, and only where the records are clear. Before we start, take a second. If you want more long, slow, fact-only documentaries like this, make sure you subscribe. It tells the algorithm that you care about careful research more than shock value. And while you are here, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or your country in the comments. It is always wild to see how far these stories travel. Now, we go back to the early 1990s, to a Harlem street corner, a gun, and a confession that arrived 17 years too late. October of 1993. East Harlem, a neighborhood where streetlights flicker against brick towers and the nights are rarely quiet. On the corner, near the James Weldon Johnson houses, 32-year-old John Henkel is standing outside a building on East 114th Street. He does not know it, but in a few seconds, his life will change forever. Moving down the sidewalk is 18-year-old Trevor Coleman. The world will later know him as G. Depp, one of the Harlem artists who helped shape an era of early 2000s rap. But tonight, he is not walking with music on his mind. He is walking with a gun. According to police records, Coleman approaches Henkel with the intent to rob him. He confronts him, points the gun, and the two men struggle. Henkel reaches for the weapon. Coleman pulls the trigger. 3 shots strike Henkel in the chest. Coleman runs. Henkel dies. And the case, like many shootings in 1993 New York, fades into the overworked stack of unsolved files. Coleman is not arrested. He is not identified. He walks away from the crime scene and, for a time, builds an entirely different life. In the late 1990s, Trevor Coleman becomes a familiar face in Harlem's rap scene. He battles, performs, and eventually signs with Bad Boy Records. In 2001, he appears on Let's Get It, a hit that helps popularize the Harlem Shake and cements his place in early 2000s hip-hop culture. He tours, he films videos, he gives interviews. On stage, he looks like a man rising, but off stage, something else is happening. Coleman struggles with a growing addiction. He racks up arrests for drugs. His life becomes less stable, less grounded, and through all of it, the memory of that night in 1993 keeps resurfacing. In later interviews, Coleman will describe feeling haunted, not knowing whether the man he shot had lived or died. He carries that uncertainty for almost 17 years. It becomes a weight that never leaves him. December of 2010. Coleman is 36 years old. The guilt has become too heavy. On a winter afternoon, he walks into the 25th precinct in East Harlem and tells the officers at the desk that he wants to confess to a shooting he committed when he was a teenager. At first, officers are unsure if they should take him seriously. He had previously attempted to confess while under the influence, and staff had not been able to verify his claims. But this time he is sober, specific, and steady. He gives details: the location, the struggle, the number of shots, the direction he ran. And detectives begin comparing his account to old case files. It matches the homicide of John Henkel. The date fits, the details fit, the shot pattern fits, the location fits. Coleman is arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The case moves slowly at first. Coleman pleads not guilty, and his defense argues that confessions, especially those involving old memories, can be unreliable. They suggest he might be combining fragments of different events, that he might have been mistaken, that the confession should not outweigh the absence of other evidence. But prosecutors present the similarities between his account and the original reports. The 3 shots, the attempted robbery, the struggle, the location near the housing complex, the description of discarding the gun afterward. In April of 2012, a Manhattan jury finds him guilty of second-degree murder. 1 month later, in May of 2012, a judge sentences him to 15 years to life in prison. the minimum sentence allowed under New York law for that conviction. Even the judge acknowledges the unusual nature of the case. An offender who had voluntarily confessed to a crime he had never been suspected of after nearly 2 decades of silence. For the family of John Henkel, the conviction brings long-delayed closure. For Coleman, it brings an answer to the question that had tormented him. The man he shot had died, and the remorse he carried had been justified. He spends the next decade behind bars. He participates in programs. He focuses on sobriety. He keeps a low profile. Then, in December of 2023, something unexpected happens. The governor commutes his sentence, noting his voluntary confession and the unusual path the case had taken. Coleman becomes eligible for parole immediately. In April of 2024, after roughly a dozen years behind bars on the murder conviction, he is released. The facts of the case remain stark. In 1993, an 18-year-old attempted a robbery in East Harlem. He fired 3 shots. He ran. A man died. The file went cold. 17 years. Later, he walked into a precinct and confessed. And those words changed the course of his life. It is a story without sensational twists, without myths, without rumors. Just a crime, a conscience, and a confession that arrived almost 2 decades late. And as we move forward in time, we leave Harlem and travel to Philadelphia, where another artist, rising in the 90s, walked into a bank with a gun. What happened there would leave a police officer dead, a family shattered, and a rapper sitting on death row for decades. January of 1996. Philadelphia is recovering from a winter storm, the kind that leaves slush piled against curbs and a gray sky overhead. Inside the Fidelity Savings Bank branch on Rising Sun Avenue, employees are preparing to open for the day. They do not know that 3 men are already on their way. Men with a plan, men carrying guns, and one of them a local rap star whose career once looked unstoppable. Before the world knew him for the crime, he was known on stage. His name was Christopher Roney. His stage name was Cool C. In the late 1980s, he emerged from Philadelphia's flourishing rap scene with hits like Glamorous Life and C Is Me, performing on stages alongside rising East Coast acts and earning a contract with Atlantic Records. His image was smooth, polished, confident. He wore gold chains. He performed in clubs that packed out on weekends. He was a hometown favorite whose future looked wide open. But by the mid-1990s, the momentum had faded. Record sales slowed, tours grew smaller, money tightened, and prosecutors would later argue that Roney made a series of desperate decisions that put him alongside 2 co-conspirators plotting a takeover-style robbery. The target? A neighborhood bank. The timing? Early morning, when employees would be arriving and the vault would be open. The plan? Enter quickly, control the staff, grab the cash, escape before police could respond. On the morning of January 3rd, the 3 men approached the door of Fidelity Savings Bank. They wore gloves. They carried guns. They intended to push their way inside before the building was fully staffed. But not everything went according to plan. At around 8 o'clock, Officer Laretha Vard, a 43-year-old Philadelphia police officer and mother of 2, responded to a silent alarm triggered by bank employees. She arrived alone. As she stepped inside, she came face to face with the robbery crew. Shots were fired. Officer Vard was struck in the chest and killed almost immediately. She became the first female Philadelphia police officer ever killed in the line of duty. Her death shook the city, and within hours, the manhunt for the suspects was underway. Witness accounts, ballistic evidence, and the getaway car would eventually connect all 3 men to the crime. Christopher Cool C. Roney, Warren Steady B. McGlone, another Philadelphia rapper, and their associate, Mark Canty. Detectives pieced together surveillance video, eyewitness statements, and forensic evidence. According to trial testimony, the 3 men had planned the robbery for weeks. Canty drove the getaway car. McGlone acted as lookout. Roney was identified as the gunman who fired the fatal shot. Roney denied shooting Officer Vard. He insisted he was not inside the bank but outside in the getaway car. But prosecutors built a detailed case around him. His fingerprints, witness accounts placing him at the scene, the recovered clothing, and the trajectory analysis linking the fatal shot to his position inside the doorway. The jury deliberated. Their conclusion was unanimous. In 1996, Christopher Cool C. Roney was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. McGlone and Canty received life sentences without parole. The story stunned the music world. A rapper who once performed in front of thousands was now on Pennsylvania's death row. A woman who showed up to work that morning was gone forever. And 2 teenage boys lost their mother. Over the next 20 years, Roney filed multiple appeals. He continued to maintain that he was innocent, arguing ineffective counsel and misidentification. But court after court upheld the conviction. His first execution date was set for March 4th, 2006, another for January 8th, 2015, and a third for January 10th, 2022. Each was stayed, not because new evidence emerged, but because Pennsylvania governors continued a statewide moratorium on executions. The state has not executed anyone since 1999, and every scheduled execution during that period, including Roney's, has been halted. During his appeals, journalists, attorneys, and fans revisited the case, searching for inconsistencies. Some pointed to discrepancies in eyewitness testimony. Others highlighted Roney's claim that he never fired a weapon. But the courts held firm. The physical evidence, trial record, and confessions from co-conspirators supported the original verdict. Officer Vaird's family continued attending hearings for decades. Each time reliving the morning, she answered that silent alarm. Her sons grew up without her. The department held annual memorials in her honor. By the time Roney's 25th year on death row arrived, the story that once dominated Philadelphia headlines had become part of crime history. A tragic reminder of how quickly a career, a family, and a life can be destroyed by a single violent act. Today, Christopher Roney remains on Pennsylvania's death row. The death warrant is still active, but the moratorium remains in place. Unless state policy changes, he will continue serving his sentence indefinitely, with no execution date expected to move forward. There are no myths needed to explain this case, no rumors or exaggerations. A failed robbery, a police officer killed, a rapper convicted, a family grieving, a city that still remembers. And as we move forward chronologically, we leave 1996 behind and step into the early 2000s, into California, where a rising artist, better known by the name Big Lurch, would commit one of the most disturbing crimes ever connected to the rap world. April of 2002, Los Angeles, California. Paramedics respond to a call in a South Central apartment. A call so disturbing that even veteran first responders will later struggle to describe what they saw. Inside lies 21-year-old Tynisha E. Sayas, the victim of an attack so brutal that headlines across the country will repeat the details for years. Standing nearby is a man the hip-hop world knows as Big Lurch, a towering rapper with a deep voice, an imposing frame, and a growing reputation in West Coast underground music. His real name is Antron Singleton. He is 26 years old. Before that morning, Singleton's life had already taken several sharp turns. He had been hit by a car in a previous accident, breaking bones and suffering chronic pain. As he struggled to recover, he turned increasingly to drugs, especially phencyclidine, better known as PCP. Friends later stated that his behavior became unpredictable, erratic, and violent when he used the drug. But none of them imagined he would become the center of one of the most notorious murder cases in early 2000s Los Angeles. On April 10, 2002, neighbors in the apartment building hear screams. Some report loud banging. Others report the sound of breaking glass. The details vary, but the concern is the same. Something violent is happening behind a closed door. When paramedics and police enter the apartment, they find Tynisha Sayas dead on the floor. Her injuries are horrific. The autopsy later determines that she died from blunt force trauma and a deep stab wound to her chest. There are additional wounds consistent with a frenzied attack. Police find Singleton in the street outside, naked, covered in blood, and exhibiting clear signs of PCP intoxication. Witnesses later testify that he appeared disoriented and unaware of what was happening. Officers detain him immediately and take him to a hospital for evaluation before placing him under arrest. Crime scene investigators collect evidence from the apartment: broken items, blood patterns, and weapons consistent with the injuries. Lab reports also confirm Singleton's blood contains PCP, reinforcing what officers had observed. The case quickly becomes national news, not because a musician is involved, but because of the gruesome nature of the crime and the extreme mental state Singleton appeared to be in at the time. Later that year, prosecutors charged Singleton with first-degree murder. They argue that despite being under the influence, he carried out a deliberate, violent attack that resulted in Yisei's death. The defense argues diminished capacity due to drug intoxication, but California law does not allow voluntary intoxication as a defense to murder. The trial draws heavy attention. Witnesses describe Singleton's erratic behavior before the attack. Medical experts testify about PCP's effects on the brain: hallucinations, paranoia, extreme aggression, and detachment from reality. The prosecution presents photographs, forensic evidence, and autopsy results, showing the extent of Yisei's injuries. But the central, undeniable fact remains. Yisei was attacked inside her own home, suffered severe trauma, and died from a combination of blunt force injuries and a fatal stab wound. Her family fills the courtroom, listening to each detail. After reviewing the evidence, the jury finds Singleton guilty of first-degree murder. In 2003, he is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case leaves several lasting consequences in the music world. At the time of the murder, Big Lurch had been working on new projects, collaborating with local artists across Los Angeles, and building connections within the West Coast rap community. His deep voice and towering presence had made him a recognizable figure. His arrest and conviction abruptly end that trajectory. Meanwhile, the victim's family files a civil suit against multiple parties, including music industry figures, alleging that individuals around Singleton encouraged his drug use to cultivate a certain image. That civil case raises public debate, but does not alter the criminal conviction. Over the years, Singleton remains incarcerated in California State Prison. He occasionally appears in interviews or articles discussing the case, always maintaining that he was not in control of his actions due to PCP, but never denying his involvement. The state's position remains unchanged. Voluntary intoxication is not a defense to murder, and the physical evidence in the apartment makes the sequence of events clear. For the family of Tynesha Yisei, the tragedy is defined by a single morning. One where a young woman lost her life in her own apartment at the hands of someone she knew. For the music world, the case stands as one of the most disturbing and widely covered crimes ever associated with a rising rap artist. Nothing in this case requires exaggeration, myth, or rumor. The facts alone carry the weight. A 21-year-old woman dead, a 26-year-old rapper intoxicated on a powerful hallucinogen, and a crime scene that shocked even seasoned Los Angeles detectives. From this point in the timeline, we move forward into the mid-2000s, into a Las Vegas feud that escalated into a deadly ambush involving a rap promoter known on the streets as Mac Minister. March of 2005, Las Vegas, Nevada. The Strip glows in neon, tourists flow along sidewalks, and taxicabs hum beneath the casino towers. But a few miles away, far from the lights, a dispute inside the rap world is about to turn into a double. Dawn homicide that will send a well-known West Coast promoter, a man who once moved effortlessly among artists and industry players, into a life sentence. His name is Andre McMinister Dow. Before the murders, Dow had a reputation in Bay Area circles as a charismatic negotiator, a connector, and a figure who lived between the music industry and the streets. He appeared in videos, did promotional work, and traveled frequently between California and Nevada. But behind the scenes, prosecutors later said Dow carried grudges, remembered disrespect, and did not forget when someone crossed him. One of those grudges involved Kansas City rapper Anthony Fat Tone Watkins. In 2004, West Coast legend Mac Dre was shot and killed in Kansas City. The killing shocked the Bay Area rap community. Rumors swirled instantly, and in the confusion that followed, Fat Tone was publicly named in gossip circles as someone who might have been involved, even though police later made it clear they never had evidence linking him to Mac Dre's death. But rumors in the rap world spread fast, and some people act on rumors. According to Las Vegas prosecutors, Dow blamed Fat Tone for Mac Dre's killing. Whether he believed the rumors or simply used them as justification, the outcome was the same. Investigators would later argue that Dow planned revenge. On May 23, 2005, Fat Tone and his friend Jermaine "Cowboy" Akins traveled to Las Vegas. What happened next became the core of the state's case. At trial, prosecutors laid out the following sequence. Dow contacted Fat Tone under the guise of wanting to help him sign a record deal and clear his name. Tone believed he was meeting industry contacts who could help change how the Bay saw him. According to witness testimony and phone records, Dow lured Tone and Akins to a Las Vegas apartment complex late that night. Inside, the prosecution said, they were ambushed. Fat Tone and Akins were both shot multiple times at close range. Their bodies were later found near a construction site on the outskirts of town. The autopsy reports detailed extensive ballistic trauma consistent with an execution-style killing. Detectives with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department began piecing together the timeline. Phone calls, witness statements, security footage, travel records. They noted that Dow fled Nevada immediately after the killings. He crossed state lines. He moved between California and the South. And he stayed moving. A warrant was issued. The manhunt began. For nearly a year, Dow avoided capture. Authorities tracked him across several states, often arriving shortly after he had left a location. Newspapers described him as elusive, skilled at disappearing, and often protected by associates who refused to speak with investigators. In March of 2006, U.S. Marshals finally tracked Dow to San Francisco. Agents surrounded a residence, and after a brief standoff, he surrendered. He was extradited to Clark County, Nevada, to stand trial for 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in 2008. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors argued motive, planning, and flight. They emphasized that Dow had contacted Tony, arranged the meeting, and left the state immediately after the killings. They presented testimony from multiple witnesses tying Dow to the ambush and placing him near the scene. They also brought in phone records showing communication between Dow and the victims shortly before the murders. The defense pushed back hard. They argued that Dow was being targeted because of his ties to Mac Dre and because of long-standing rivalries in the rap world. They argued that key witnesses were unreliable, including at least one who received leniency in other legal matters after cooperating. They repeatedly pointed out that there was no direct physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, tying Dow to the weapon or the exact location where the bodies were found. But circumstantial evidence is still evidence, and in Nevada courts, it carries weight. After reviewing the case, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Dow to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Co-defendant Jason J. Diggs Mathis was also convicted in a separate proceeding and received a similarly lengthy sentence. Dow has maintained his innocence for years. Interviews from prison show him insisting he was framed, set up, or targeted because of relationships within the industry. He has tried appeals, post-conviction petitions, and legal challenges, all rejected. In 2024 and 2025, news outlets covered his continued efforts to overturn the conviction. Dow claimed new evidence would clear him, but Nevada courts stated that none of the filings met the threshold for reopening the case. His life sentence remains intact. 2 men, Anthony Fat Tone Watkins and Jermaine Akins, were killed in Las Vegas that night. Dow is the man Nevada holds responsible. He remains in custody at High Desert State Prison. The facts of the case stay the same. A rumored motive, a meeting arranged under false pretenses, 2 victims found days later, and a promoter whose career ended inside a courtroom. No speculation needed, no street legends, only what the court accepted as true. From here, we stay in the 2000s and move several years forward, to Louisiana, where another high-profile rapper, better known as C-Murder, faced a second-degree murder conviction tied to a shooting inside a nightclub. January of 2002, Harvey, Louisiana. The Platinum Club sits just off the West Bank Expressway, a warehouse-style nightclub filled with flashing lights, loud music, and the push and movement of a packed crowd. It is the kind of place where young people go to dance, to drink, to watch local performers on stage. Among the performers that night is 30-year-old Corey C. Murder Miller, a well-known artist from the No Limit Records era, younger brother of Master P, and a man whose fame draws attention wherever he goes. But as the night unfolds, a confrontation begins that will end in gunfire, and a murder conviction that Miller continues to dispute more than 2 decades later. The victim is 16-year-old Steve Thomas, a fan who came to the club that night not just to dance, but to see performers up close. A teenager excited to be there, caught in a crowd of people older, louder, and far more experienced in the nightlife of Harvey. Inside the club, the atmosphere grows tense. At some point, an altercation breaks out between Miller's group and others in the crowd. Witnesses later describe punches thrown, a chaotic scuffle, people pushing and shouting. In the confusion, someone pulls out a handgun. Shots ring out. When the room clears, Steve Thomas lies on the floor with a fatal gunshot wound to the chest. Patrons rush outside, police are called, the club empties in seconds. Officers begin interviewing witnesses, many of whom point in the same direction, toward C murder. According to law enforcement officials and prosecutors, several witnesses claimed Miller was the shooter, or that he was seen holding a gun. Others gave conflicting statements. Some changed their stories over time. The case from the beginning was a tangle of eyewitness accounts, each one describing a scene filled with darkness, flashing lights, loud music, and panic. Still, Miller is arrested on a charge of second-degree murder. In the months after the shooting, prosecutors gather surveillance footage, interview dozens of witnesses, and reconstruct the chaotic fight. The footage is grainy. It does not clearly show the moment of the shooting, nor does it capture who held the weapon at the precise second the shot was fired. This becomes one of the central challenges of the case, and later, one of the main points of controversy. In 2003, Miller goes on trial for the first time. Jurors hear from witnesses who say they saw him with a gun. Others say they saw someone else. One recants, another changes details. The jury convicts him, but that conviction is thrown out. The judge determines that prosecutors improperly withheld information about a key witness's criminal background, grounds for a mistrial. A second trial begins in 2009. This time, the outcome will not be undone. Witnesses again take the stand. Some testify they saw Miller fire the weapon. Others describe seeing him stand over Thomas. The descriptions vary, but the prosecution argues that the pattern is clear. Miller was the aggressor, and the shot that killed Thomas came from his direction during the fight. The defense attacks the credibility of the accounts. They point to contradictions. They highlight witnesses who admitted feeling pressured by police. They emphasize the low quality of the surveillance footage. But the jury again reaches the same conclusion. In August of 2009, C. Murder is convicted of second-degree murder and eventually sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence for second-degree murder in Louisiana. He is transferred to the Louisiana State Penitentiary, known as Angola. That is where the legal battle truly begins. Miller maintains he is innocent. Celebrities, including members of his family and later Kim Kardashian, publicly support renewed reviews of the case. Multiple witnesses recant. Some state publicly that they were pressured during the original investigation. Others insist their trial testimony was accurate and not coerced. Still, Louisiana courts repeatedly uphold the conviction. Appeal after appeal is denied. Requests for a new trial are rejected, with judges stating that, even accounting for recantations, the evidence presented at trial remains legally sufficient. In 2021, the Louisiana Supreme Court declines to hear his appeal. In interviews, Miller continues to maintain that he did not kill Thomas. The state continues to insist that the conviction stands on firm ground. Through all of this, one fact never changes. 16-year-old Steve Thomas never made it home that night. His family has spent more than 20 years attending hearings, speaking to reporters, and pushing back against claims that the wrong man was convicted. To them, the case is not about celebrity or controversy. It is about a teenager whose life was cut short inside a nightclub. The Platinum Club has long since closed. Security footage from that night is still grainy. Witness memories have faded, sharpened, or shifted depending on who speaks. But the final result, a life sentence, remains intact. C. Murder sits in Angola, still serving life without parole. Supporters still argue for a new trial. The state still defends the original verdict. Nothing in this case needs myth or rumor. A fight in a nightclub, a single fatal shot, conflicting memories, and a sentence that has not changed in more than a decade. From here, we move into the 2010s, where another artist, this time from the New York scene, became involved in a case that began with a street encounter and ended with a manslaughter conviction, a case involving a member of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. August of 2017, Midtown Manhattan. The city moves the way it always does, fast, crowded, alive at all hours. Office workers spill out of buildings. The neon glow of late-night storefronts illuminates sidewalks. Taxis hiss through wet streets. Among the people weaving through the evening traffic is Nathaniel Glover, known to most of the world as Kid Creole, one of the founding members of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, a pioneer of rap, a man whose verses helped shape the earliest era of hip-hop. But tonight, he is simply another man walking to work. Until a chance encounter on a Manhattan sidewalk turns into a fatal confrontation. The victim is John Jolly, a 55-year-old homeless man known in the neighborhood. Witnesses later say he often lingered in the area, but was not considered threatening. On the night of August 2nd, shortly before midnight, Glover walks past Jolly on East 44th Street between 3rd and Lexington. Surveillance video later shows the two men crossing paths on the sidewalk. According to prosecutors, Jolly says something to Glover, words that are never clearly heard on camera and remain disputed. Glover reacts immediately. He turns back toward Jolly. The confrontation lasts only seconds. What is beyond dispute is what happens next. Glover reaches into his clothing, pulls out a knife, and stabs Jolly twice in the torso. Jolly collapses on the sidewalk as Glover backs away. Instead of waiting for police or calling for help, Glover leaves the scene and continues walking. A passerby finds Jolly shortly afterward. Emergency responders rush him to Bellevue Hospital, but he dies from his wounds. The medical examiner later concludes the cause of death is stab wounds to the chest, with internal bleeding that could not be stopped in time. Police identify Glover quickly. He works nearby as a security guard and has been seen regularly on the street. Surveillance cameras capture the entire encounter. Within hours, detectives locate and arrest him. During questioning, Glover does not deny the stabbing. He claims he acted in self-defense. He tells investigators he believed Jolly was about to harm him. He says he thought Jolly made a sexually suggestive comment, and that this triggered fear and anger. But police find no weapon on Jolly, no sign he physically attacked Glover, and no evidence he threatened him. A day after the killing, detectives locate the knife Glover used, hidden in a sewer near the scene, exactly where he had admitted throwing it after fleeing. He is charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. The case draws immediate media attention, not just because of Glover's legacy in hip-hop, but because of the stark simplicity of the encounter. Two men crossing paths, a brief exchange, and a stabbing that seemed to happen almost instantly. As the investigation continues, more details emerge. Prosecutors say Glover later told officers he felt disrespected, and that the comment he believed Jolly made offended him. They argue that anger, not danger, motivated the stabbing. Detective testimony indicates that Glover showed no visible injuries and had no cuts or bruises suggesting a struggle. Meanwhile, the defense prepares a case built on Glover's perception of threat. His attorneys argue that Jolly reached toward him, that he felt cornered, and that Glover's life experience, including his age and the setting, made him reasonably afraid. But the surveillance footage becomes the central piece of evidence. There is no sound, but the movements are clear. Jolly steps slightly toward Glover, but does not lunge. He does not raise his arms. He does not strike. Glover, on the other hand, closes the distance himself before stabbing him twice. The trial begins in 2022, nearly 5 years after the killing, delayed by procedural issues, court backlogs, and the pandemic. In court, prosecutors show the video frame by frame. They remind the jury that Glover walked away instead of calling for help. They emphasize that Jolly was unarmed and that the wounds he sustained were deep and deliberate. The defense calls character witnesses, highlighting Glover's contributions to music history, his age, and his long struggle to maintain stable employment. They argue he believed he was in imminent danger, that he acted out of panic, not malice. But voluntary fear, the prosecution counters, is not the same as legal justification. The law requires imminent threat. The video shows none. On April 6, 2022, the jury reaches its verdict. Kid Creole is guilty of manslaughter in the first degree. The judge later sentences him to 16 years in prison, followed by 5 years of post-release supervision. Glover, nearly 62 at the time, is taken into custody and sent to state prison. For a man once considered part of rap's earliest vanguard, the fall is immense. A pioneer now serving a lengthy sentence for a sidewalk stabbing that lasted moments. John Jolly's family expresses relief at the verdict, saying justice has been served for a man who lived a difficult life and met a violent end he did not provoke. Glover's supporters express sadness, noting his contributions to music and the complicated circumstances that shaped his later years. But the court's position remains firm. An unarmed man died. The video contradicted the claim of self-defense. The knife was thrown away, and the law responded accordingly. The Midtown sidewalk where the stabbing occurred is busy again, as it always was. Commuters walk by unaware that one moment in 2017 changed the lives of two men forever, one losing his life, the other losing his freedom. From here, we move further into the 2000s, to London, where a young drill rapper named Suze became involved in a case that sparked both public outrage and legal scrutiny across the UK scene. May of 2022, Brockley, South London. A warm spring night settles over the neighborhood. Rows of brick homes, quiet streets, and the occasional rumble of a passing car. Just after 9:30 in the evening, the silence breaks. Gunshots echo across Lewisham Way. Residents look out their windows, some duck, some freeze, and in the street below, a 17-year-old boy collapses onto the pavement. His name is Jaden J. Boy Moyo, a teenager from the area. He has been shot in the chest. His friends scream for help, and within minutes, police begin receiving emergency calls. This is the moment that will eventually lead detectives to a rising UK drill artist, Sus, real name Jordan Reese Benjamin, a member of the group Active Gang, known for tracks that run deep in the London drill scene and for controversies that often followed the group's notoriety. Before this night, Active Gang had already been under surveillance by London's Metropolitan Police. Gang tensions across South London, between Peckham, Brixton, Lewisham, and other areas, had escalated sharply. Music videos, coded lyrics, and online taunts had fueled rivalries. Detectives had flagged the group in intelligence briefings, not for their music alone, but for ongoing violence linked to territorial disputes. Tonight's shooting becomes part of that pattern. Just after the gunfire, witnesses describe a car speeding away, a Ford Kuga, dark-colored, moving quickly through the narrow streets. CCTV cameras mounted on nearby storefronts capture the vehicle in motion. A hooded passenger leans partially out of the window. The muzzle flash of a gun lights up the frame for a fraction of a second. Jaden Moyo dies on the pavement before paramedics can save him. When detectives arrive, they begin the familiar process: cordon off the area, preserve the shell casings, collect witness statements, review CCTV. What they do not have, at first, is a clear suspect. But they do have a car. And London's CCTV network turns out to be one of the crucial tools in the investigation. Over the next several weeks, detectives map every turn the Ford Kuga made that night. Cameras trace it through New Cross into Deptford, then toward Peckham. Each camera adds a new angle, a new timestamp, a new location. Eventually, police identify a burnt-out vehicle matching the same model and color. Inside, forensic specialists find traces of accelerant and a few charred items. Not enough to recover DNA, but enough to confirm the vehicle was deliberately destroyed. A pattern is emerging. Using mobile phone mass data, investigators then begin piecing together which devices were active near the route the Kuga took. They identify a cluster of numbers moving in sync. One of them belongs to Jordan Reese Benjamin, Sus. When the case goes to court, prosecutors present a timeline built almost entirely from surveillance footage, phone data, and witness accounts. They allege that the shooting was a targeted drive-by attack connected to gang rivalry. They argue that Sus was in the vehicle, participating in the attack that killed Jaden Moyo. Defense attorneys argue that the evidence does not place Sus at the scene on camera. They point out that the prosecution does not present a clear, identifiable image of the shooter's face. They emphasize that phone data only proves proximity, not presence, and that the case relies heavily on circumstantial lines drawn between bits of video, cell tower pings, and the movements of the burned-out car. But prosecutors counter that the combination of evidence creates a clear pattern. The phone moving with the car, the known gang conflict between groups in the area, the CCTV that tracks the Cougar's route to and from the shooting, and the forensic confirmation that the recovered vehicle is the same one caught on camera. The jury listens to days of technical testimony, digital analysts, CCTV experts, forensic specialists, cell tower engineers. Then they hear from police gang units who testify about tensions between groups and incidents leading up to the shooting. The final picture is one prosecutors say leaves little room for doubt. In May of 2023, Jaden Moyo's killers are found guilty of murder. Among them is Jordan Seuss, Reese Benjamin. The court sentences him to life imprisonment, with a minimum term set according to UK sentencing guidelines for murder committed using a firearm. With this sentence, Seuss, once a rising figure in one of the most talked-about drill groups in London, becomes one of several young artists whose careers ended not with record deals or concerts, but with a prison number. The case sparks immediate debate in the UK. Drill music and gang violence, art versus reality, lyrics versus lived experience, and how, in communities marked by generational conflict, music can sometimes be swept into narratives far larger than any one performer. But for the family of Jaden Moyo, the case is not a debate. It is a loss that cannot be reversed. Their 17-year-old son never came home. His mother speaks outside the courtroom, describing him as bright, funny, full of potential. She reminds reporters that behind every headline is a child who won't grow up. For investigators, the case becomes an example of how modern policing, CCTV mapping, phone analysis, digital evidence, can solve crimes even when no forensic trace survives. For the drill community, it becomes a warning. Fame cannot outrun real-world violence. And for Seuss, it becomes the end of his career, a life sentence handed down in a courtroom far from the music videos that once gave him an audience. From here, our timeline moves deeper into the late 2010s, to another case involving a rapper whose music career collided with violence, but this time in Texas, where a car chase, a home invasion, and a robbery left one man dead and a teenage rapper facing decades in prison. October of 2016 in Mansfield, Texas. A quiet suburban street, a rental house, and a group of teenagers planning something they believed would make them quick money. Among them is 16-year-old Tamor Trayvon McIntyre, a kid who will not become famous for a song, not yet, but for the crimes that follow. The plan the group puts together is simple on paper and deadly in practice. They will rob a man they believe keeps drugs and cash in his home. The target is 21-year-old Ethan Walker. That night, they lure Walker to the door under false pretenses. When he opens it, the group forces their way in. In the chaos that follows, another member of the group fires a gun. Walker is shot and killed. His roommate Zachary Belode is also shot but survives. Texas law does not require the shooter to be the only one held responsible. The law of parties makes each participant accountable for the fatal consequences of a planned robbery. Tay K becomes one of the accused. He is arrested shortly afterward and placed on house arrest. The case is building against him, detectives are processing evidence, lawyers are preparing arguments, and he is ordered to remain inside his home. But in March of 2017, he makes a decision that changes everything. He cuts off his ankle monitor and flees. Before the legal system can finish its work, McIntyre disappears. In the days that follow, he records a song and films a video that will change his public image forever. It is called The Race. It is a song about being on the run, about fleeing the law, about outsmarting the system. It is recorded while he is actively doing those things. The track goes viral almost immediately. Millions of views, national headlines. A fugitive who is not hiding in the shadows, but creating art about the escape. But running does not protect him from further trouble. On April 23, 2017, while still a fugitive, Tay K becomes involved in another crime. In Arlington, Texas, 23-year-old photographer Mark Anthony Saldivar confronts a group of individuals he believes have stolen his equipment. Surveillance video later captures part of the encounter. The confrontation becomes heated. A vehicle accelerates. Saldivar is struck. He tries to get up, and someone in or near the vehicle fires a gun. Saldivar is killed. Prosecutors later charged Tay K with murder in this case as well, alleging he was part of the robbery that immediately preceded the shooting and part of the group inside the vehicle. By June of 2017, after months on the run, U.S. Marshals locate and arrest him in New Jersey. He is returned to Texas to face both murder cases and multiple robbery charges. The image of the teenage fugitive, once glamorized online, becomes a courtroom reality. 2 years later, in July of 2019, the first case, the Mansfield home invasion that killed Ethan Walker, goes to trial. The courtroom is filled with witnesses, evidence, text messages, planning details, and ballistic reports. Prosecutors present the robbery plot step by step. They outline who recruited whom, who knocked on the door, who hid weapons, who stood where in the hallway. They make clear that Tay K did not fire the fatal shot, but argue that he helped plan the robbery and was present during the crime that caused Walker's death. Under Texas law, that is enough for a murder conviction. The jury agrees. He is found guilty of murder and 3 counts of aggravated robbery. The judge sentences him to 55 years in prison for murder, plus additional concurrent sentences of 20 and 10 years. But his legal trouble does not end there. While serving time in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice System, he still faces the Arlington case. Years of preparation, filings, delays, and hearings follow. Witnesses are subpoenaed. Surveillance footage is analyzed again. Prosecutors argue that the robbery that preceded Saldivar's killing was part of the same pattern the public had already seen. Violence escalating around a teenager making choices with deadly consequences. In April of 2025, a Texas jury finds him guilty of murder in the Saldivar case, adding a second murder conviction to his record. By now, the narrative that once circulated online, the rebellious teenager outrunning police, collapses under the weight of 2 homicide convictions. His public persona disappears behind the facts. 2 men are dead, and he played a role in both crimes. Courts reject his appeals. His sentences stand. Today, Tay K remains incarcerated in Texas, serving time that stretches decades into the future. Interviews conducted from prison show a different version of the young man who once recorded a song while on the run. He expresses regret, but faces a legal reality that cannot be undone by remorse. Ethan Walker died in his own home during a planned robbery. Mark Saldivar died in a parking lot during a confrontation following a theft. Families of both victims continue to grieve, and the legal record reflects that sorrow with severity. There is no mythology needed to explain how a teenager with talent and a growing following ended up with multiple murder convictions. The documented chain of events is clear: a robbery that turned deadly, a fugitive period that garnered fame, a second killing during the months he was running, 2 juries, 2 verdicts, and a future now measured in decades behind bars. From here, our timeline moves deeper into the late 20-teens, to Florida, where another rising star, known as YNW Melly, became the center of one of the most scrutinized double murder cases in modern hip-hop. October of 2018, Miramar, Florida. It is late, the streets are quiet, and a Jeep Compass sits damaged on the side of the road. Inside are 2 young men, both shot multiple times. Their names are Christopher YNW Juvie, Thomas Jr., 20 years old, and Anthony YNW Sack Chaser Williams, 21 years old, close friends, rising artists, and members of the same musical collective. Their deaths will become the center of one of the most heavily scrutinized cases in modern rap history, pulling their friend Jamel Demons, known worldwide as YNW Melly, into a legal storm that has not ended even years later. What happens that night begins with a phone call to police. Officers arrive to find Demon's associate, Cortland Henry, known as YNW Bortland, claiming that he and the 2 victims had been shot in a drive-by attack. The Jeep shows bullet damage. The windows are shattered. The story, at first glance, seems plausible. Miramar has seen violence before, but investigators notice immediately that something about the scene feels wrong. The direction of the bullet holes, the trajectory, the pattern inside the car, the lack of shell casings consistent with an outside shooter. Detectives begin reconstructing the physical evidence, and with every new detail, the story of a drive-by becomes harder to believe. Within days, the Miramar Police Department opens a full homicide investigation. Phone records, digital data, and forensic analysis begin to fill in the gaps. According to investigators, the Jeep's interior shows bullet patterns suggesting the victims were shot from inside the vehicle, not outside. The blood spatter, position of wounds, and angles of entry point toward close-range fire. There are no signs of shots fired from passing vehicles. There are no eyewitnesses who report a drive-by at the time Henry described. The vehicle is later determined to have been driven around after the shootings, not directly to the hospital. As the investigation deepens, detectives zero in on two central figures, Jamel Demons and Cortland Henry. Exactly what happened inside the vehicle that night is the core of the case, and the part that prosecutors claim they can prove through forensic reconstruction. In early 2019, police arrest Demons on 2 counts of premeditated murder, alleging that he shot both victims while inside the Jeep and that Henry helped stage the scene to resemble a drive-by attack. The arrest makes headlines across the country. Melly is a rising star. He has millions of streams, a rapidly growing fan base, and a catalog of songs that seem eerie in hindsight, including the track "Murder on My Mind," which many people mistakenly think describes the actual killings, though prosecutors make clear the song was written years earlier and is unrelated to the case. When Melly is booked into the Broward County Jail, he faces the possibility of the death penalty, one of the rare times in recent years that a prominent musician has confronted that sentence. Prosecutors argue that digital evidence places him at the scene. They point to phone records that show his device moving with the Jeep. They reference ballistic evidence linking the bullet patterns to shots fired from inside the vehicle. The defense counters with equal force. They argue that the state cannot prove Melly fired the shots. They question the interpretation of forensic evidence. They highlight the lack of eyewitnesses and emphasize that Henry was the one who physically drove the vehicle after the killings. They claim investigators are relying heavily on reconstruction rather than direct proof. Years pass. The case moves slowly. The pandemic delays proceedings. Melly remains in custody while attorneys on both sides prepare. In June of 2023, the first trial begins. It Iced becomes one of the most closely watched court cases of the year. Reporters fill the gallery. Fans line up outside the courthouse. Inside, jurors hear weeks of ballistic testimony, cell phone mapping, medical examiner findings, and expert explanations of blood patterns inside the Jeep. When the jury begins deliberating, the room tenses. Days pass. Eventually, the jury tells the judge they are deadlocked. They cannot reach a unanimous verdict. The judge declares a mistrial, but the case is far from over. Prosecutors announce they will retry Melly. They file new pretrial motions. The defense challenges them. The retrial date shifts repeatedly, eventually pushed into January of 2027. Along the way, more court drama unfolds. In 2024 and 2025, Melly attempts to replace his legal team, leading to hearings covered heavily by national media. Judges caution him. Attorneys argue. Nothing is resolved quickly. Through it all, the families of the victims attend hearing after hearing, insisting publicly that the case must move forward. Christopher Thomas Jr. and Anthony Williams are remembered not only as members of the YNW collective, but as sons and brothers whose lives ended violently in the back seat of a Jeep. The state continues to maintain that the evidence tells a clear story: a staged crime scene, an interior shooting, and a digital trail that places Melly inside the vehicle. The defense maintains that the state cannot prove who fired the shots beyond a reasonable doubt. As of now, Melly remains incarcerated awaiting his retrial, and Henry also awaits his fate on related charges. No verdict has been reached. No sentence has been delivered. The only undisputed facts are these: 2 young men were killed in a Jeep, the scene was staged to resemble a drive-by, and the question of who pulled the trigger remains at the center of one of the most divisive cases in the rap world. From here, our timeline moves backward across the map and deeper into the early 2000s, to Los Angeles, where a towering figure in West Coast underground rap committed one of the most disturbing crimes the industry has ever confronted. March of 2024. Homeland Security agents descend on luxury homes in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York City, properties linked to Sean P. Diddy Combs. Black SUVs line the streets, helicopters circle above, and tactical teams move in. Neighbors film from behind fences as federal agents carry out boxes of electronics, hard drives, and sealed bags of evidence. The raids mark the beginning of one of the most high-profile federal investigations ever attached to a music mogul. For decades, Combs stood at the center of American pop culture. He launched artists, built fashion lines, and created a public image of wealth and untouchable celebrity power. But the federal investigation that unfolded in 2024 and 2025 presented a very different story. One built not on rumor or speculation, but on official charges filed in federal court. In September of 2024, prosecutors unsealed a sweeping indictment. It charged Combs with multiple federal offenses, including a racketeering conspiracy that prosecutors claimed spanned decades, and several counts under the Mann Act for transporting individuals for prostitution. The indictment alleged that as early as 2004, Combs orchestrated a network of associates who facilitated what prosecutors described as coercive and exploitative conduct. They pointed to a pattern of recruiting, isolating, and controlling victims through threats, drugs, and manipulation. Combs pleaded not guilty to all charges. Prosecutors described a world hidden behind fame, money, and multi-city travel, hotel rooms booked under layers of assistance, payments made through shell accounts, and surveillance that kept victims dependent. They claimed Combs used his status and resources to insulate himself from accountability. The details included accounts from former girlfriends, assistants, and individuals who said they had been pressured into sexual encounters they did not want, often after being isolated or intoxicated. According to the government, some victims were transported across state lines under the guise of work obligations, only to be forced into encounters that benefited Combs personally or served to maintain control over them. The defense painted a different picture. Combs' attorneys argued that the allegations were exaggerated, opportunistic, or financially motivated. They said Combs had long been part of a consensual adult lifestyle, that the government was misinterpreting behavior, and that the prosecution leaned heavily on unreliable witnesses. They emphasized that no one had ever accused Combs of homicide or violent kidnapping and argued that the Mann Act charges were being unfairly applied. But the court ordered he remain detained without bail, citing the seriousness of the allegations and the risk of witness intimidation. By the spring of 2025, the case moved to trial in Manhattan federal court. For weeks, the jury listened as more than 30 witnesses testified. Some described being invited into Combs' inner circle, only to later feel trapped. Others detailed emotionally abusive relationships, manipulation, and threats they said kept them compliant. The prosecution presented hotel records, booking itineraries, financial transfers, and communications. They argued supported a pattern of transportation designed to place victims in locations where they could be exploited. Forensic analysts, travel coordinators, and federal agents testified about the digital footprints left behind: text messages, emails, and travel logs. The courtroom atmosphere was intense. Reporters filled every seat. Supporters and critics gathered outside daily. As witness after witness took the stand, the prosecution focused on establishing a consistent pattern: that Combs used his stature and network to arrange encounters that crossed state lines and violated federal law. The defense countered by attacking credibility. They argued that memories were unreliable and that consensual relationships were being reframed years later under pressure. They noted inconsistencies in several accounts and raised questions about the reliability of witnesses who had received immunity or who had financial claims pending against Combs. They also argued that the government had failed to prove the existence of a coordinated criminal enterprise, insisting that Combs' business operations were legitimate and that any misconduct alleged by witnesses was unconnected and consensual. After weeks of testimony, both sides rested. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the jury left to deliberate. Hours passed, then a full day, then two. On the third day, the jury returned with a mixed verdict. Sean P. Diddy Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. The jury found that the prosecution had not proven those specific allegations beyond a reasonable doubt, but they did convict him on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution under the Mann Act, crimes that carry significant prison sentences. As the verdict was read, Combs sat motionless, no outburst, no reaction, just a long, heavy stare at the table before him. Outside, reporters relayed the split decision to a world already divided by the case. Some saw vindication, others saw partial accountability. The victims who had testified expressed relief that at least some charges had resulted in conviction. Combs now awaits sentencing. The offenses he was convicted of carry a maximum of up to 20 years in federal prison. And although he has already spent considerable time detained, the final length of his sentence will be determined by the judge based on federal guidelines. His legal team has already signaled its intent to appeal. Beyond the courtroom, the consequences continue. Brand partnerships have been suspended. Television projects have been pulled. Companies that once celebrated Combs' influence now distance themselves publicly. His legacy in music, fashion, and entertainment is overshadowed by a federal conviction and an ongoing legal battle that may stretch years into the future. But no matter how the appeals unfold, one reality remains fixed. A man who once stood at the center of an empire now sits behind bars, facing a sentence measured in years. A figure who built a public life on success, image, and control now waits for the federal system to decide the remainder of his future. And now, after moving through every one of these cases, we arrive at the quiet part. The moment where the stories fade, the courtroom doors close, and the weight of what happened finally settles. Each chapter traced a different path, but they all led to the same destination. People whose actions destroyed lives, careers that collapsed under the truth, and victims whose names deserve to be remembered long after the headlines disappear. When you strip away the fame, the music, the personas, and the noise around each case, the core remains the same. Power turned into violence, influence twisted into control, choices made in moments that changed everything. Some of these men pulled triggers, some planned ambushes, some manipulated, exploited, or coerced, and every single one left families grieving, communities shaken, and histories permanently altered. If you've stayed with this story from the beginning, take a moment now and make sure you hit subscribe. It may seem small, but it keeps this series alive. It tells the algorithm that long-form, factual storytelling still matters, that you want calm, detailed, researched documentaries instead of fast, sensational fragments. It allows these cases to be told with clarity, respect, and truth. And now, I want to hear from you, the person watching right now. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Every time you answer, the comments fill with a map of viewers from everywhere. Big cities, small towns, night shifts, long drives, quiet bedrooms, sleepless hours. Add your place to that map. And tell me something else. Which case stayed with you the most? Which chapter made you pause or feel that moment of heaviness these stories often leave behind? Thank you for watching. And wherever you are tonight, stay safe.